Hey, Vaush.
Sorry, my audience was being very friendly to me. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Yeah, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. All right, hit me up. I have severe brain damage after a couple of conversations with the politics boys, so this is
Yeah.
I'm in a weakened state. Okay, if I were to be caught with a pokeball, this would be the time.
Sorry, I'm ignorant. I just finished
No,
my
it's
shift.
good that you
Otherwise,
didn't.
I would have seen it.
No, don't.
Maybe that was a blessing in disguise,
It
right?
was. Yeah, hit me up.
Okay. So let's cut to the chase. So I have a big problem with your understanding of uh the subjective moral landscape. So basically, uh, if we understand morality in a moral anti-realist perspective, or at the very least, if we just don't give a shit about objective morality, it that's the landscape I'm focusing on. So it's a landscape in which there is no objective moral facts, as in like there is not one framework that is above or and more important than any other, like from an objective TM standpoint, right? So what I'm interested in at this point is figuring out what is the best for each and every individual. And from that perspective, I think we can have um, how do I put this? I think we can have semi-objective moral reasoning in the sense that this is going to sound like a bastardization of the word objective,
Well, I
but
think the term you're pulling for here is intersubjective, where it's subjective in an empirical sense, but it's objective in like the context of a broader group consensus.
yeah, I don't care about the consensus part.
Well, like you could say the consensus of like human moral experience or something, like what we perceive to be valuable or beneficial. Okay, so it's just to get the audience on the ground foot here so they understand what my position is. I'm a moral anti-realist. I don't actually believe that morals are objective or can be objective. I think that we have moral axioms, which are basic things that we want or that we desire or think are good, or like properly basic beliefs or moral preconditions or whatever you want to call them. And I think that it is possible to think things are objectively good or bad in the context of those axioms. So, for example, if you think that it is good that humans not starve to death, that it's good that we have the ability to eat, like that's just a thing we get default, there are objective policies for making that better. Like you could say it is objectively good that we pass this law to give everyone like food stamps or like a universal basic income or something, that kind of thing. So what this caller has emailed me about is that the problem with me not believing that there's an objectively correct set of beliefs or axioms is that theoretically, any set of moral positions could be correct within a given framework, like the Nazi position. Like if your axioms are such, you could believe that the Nazis are like morally correct within a given purview. And my answer to that has always been, I do believe that. That's when you pick up a rock. That's the rock time. That's when you deploy the rock. Um,
Uh,
so that's
Sorry.
always been my basic argument, that there's no like objective or whatever. We basically just have to fight it out over our intersubjective beliefs. Sorry.
Right, and that's actually not my stance.
Oh, I'm
I'm
sorry.
not. I don't believe in objective morality, and even if it did, I just finished writing a script for a video. Even if it did exist, I don't care if it exists. I'm not moral because some framework tells me to do so. Arguably, that's not even being moral, because acting moral means you do it out of your own like willingness to do so. You don't do it because it's right or whatever. You know what I mean? Point is, that's a tangent. I I don't subscribe to that. I'm not gonna come up here and do some like companions and guilt argument and try to like force you to accept objective morality. I think objective morality is dead, at least in the sense a lot of people, especially like theists, imagine it or describe it. What I said in my email was that from the context of from the subjective context of humanity, within the context of what humans want, we can have objective morality in the sense that what I try to build in ethics, there are two imperatives. There's the categorical imperative, which is what Kant tried to outline, and that is basically something you must do in every situation. A hypothetical imperative, it's very familiar. It's if then statements. It's if you subscribe to this view, then you must subscribe to this view. And all I'm trying to get across to you is that within the context of humanity, and since fascists are humans, I mean, well, I think their humanity can be restored at least. Um, Within that context, we can appeal to them, and we don't just have to hit them with a rock to get them to think that they're wrong and to think that they're not only acting against their own self-interest, but acting against the interests of those they ought to care about. And when we argue that they ought to care about, people they don't care about, we could use stuff like marginal cases, similar to how vegans argue you should care about animals. But really, just I said a lot, but really just to
No,
to to
I agree in the sense that I do think that humans kind of have like an innate gravitation towards some axioms, but even then it's only kind of a general gravitation and not like a very specific one. Um, but I don't think there's anything objectively wrong about a person who says like, "Oh yeah, axiomatically I believe in maximizing human suffering" or something like that. Like
but
if a person like in their mind was like, I am just a vehicle for suffering, I will inflict that on as many people as I can, like some kind of anime villain. I don't think that's a morally wrong position in the sense that it's any less substantive or consistent than mine. I just think you have to deploy the rock. I think that people, because we're social animals, have a kind of like intuition towards things like cooperation and empathy, and those are going to bias our subjectively held axioms. But I don't think that makes them any more right. I just think that makes other ones less intuitive. Like the axioms that might make Nazi ideology consistent and legitimate are less intuitive than mine. We're less predisposed towards them, and therefore it might be easier to pull people over to ours. But I would believe them both equally arbitrary in the sense that neither refers to some kind of broader truth.
okay. Uh, there's some stuff to unpack there. Okay, so geez, I even talk like you. This is what watching Vaush does to a person.
Listen,
um,
it's happened to me too.
okay. First of all, oh gosh, that humor just destroyed my whole train of thought. No. Okay. So the first problem I guess I have is that I don't care about axioms. First of all, I'm not even sure how you're using those. I think I can understand more or less how you're trying to use them, and that's fine. However you use them, like language prescriptivism, whatever. I don't care about that. My problem is and this is a broader problem with how we. This is actually a problem. See, you can tell that I just got off a shift because I'm not doing philosophy correctly.
I
Um,
apologize for bothering you at this hour.
It's totally fine. I was actually really surprised. I saw a notification and then I was like, oh well, maybe it's happening tonight. Uh, so I have a problem with how morality and we didn't even define morality in this debate, and I think that's a big problem. So how would you define morality? Let's just get that out of the way.
Oh God, the consideration of what is good or what is just. That's complicated. I don't know.
Okay, what is good?
Um, Well, in my case, I would say what is good is what contributes to positive utility in line of achieving your axiomatic values.
Okay, do you think there's like a definition of good that at least describes, like in a descriptive sense, describes what people mean by the word good?
No, unless there's a precondition. So you can say that something is objectively good for X, like maybe you can say, doing this thing is objectively good towards this end, but without the precondition, I don't think there's any way to say whether or not something is good. I think it has to be precontextual. And even then, that's just for empirical stuff. Like you could say, throwing this ball would be good at getting it in the net, and that could be like an empirical statement. But as for the ethics, you would have to have the additional precondition. The precondition would have to be axiomatic, like feeding the poor is good in the context of you believing it good that humans not suffer,
Yes. Okay. Right. I totally agree with you. So the way I would define moral is okay. So in moral philosophy, philosophers never, or at least not in contemporary philosophers, they don't strike a difference between morality and ethics. But if I may ask you, within the context of this debate, can we agree on the definition of morality? This is my own crackpot definition. I don't even talk about it with other people because people get confused. But can we think of morality as the moral like the normative intuitions people have about what is right and wrong?
So you mean ethics would be the study and morality would be kind of like the default positions we have?
Ethics is about uh, ethics is about figuring out what is best for you from your own subjective interest. Does that make sense?
I guess I know that like a lot
So
of different definitions get bantied about for this stuff. I've never really like thought that much about the difference between morals and ethics. But for the
there
context
is
of
no
this
difference.
uh,
Right.
or you know however they're used. But for the context of this
Right.
convo, I can accept your definitions for
Okay, so the important reason why I make this distinction is because, and this is my problem with you basing your morality off of axioms that seem entirely subjective. Uh, it seems as if, like, that phrase, and I absolutely hate it, morally lucky, is then necessarily true about every single person who ever even agrees with you or disagrees with you. They just got lucky in the sense that their axioms were determined by their time period. And
yes, I
and when
fully
you try
believe
to
that.
say it, yeah, and that's just bad. It's hard. It's really hard for me to agree with that because I think we can have something better in the form of ethics. Because in ethics, if we agree, um, ethics is the study of figuring out what is best for people from their own interest. Then we can arrive at more concrete, universal and lasting principles to talk about normative
But
subjects
that makes a
on and
presumption,
with.
right? Then a person who doesn't have the interests of others at heart might not care about ethics at all. The idea that ethics should be about maximizing everyone's well-being is itself an ethical position.
Okay, this is a great point. This is a great point. So there are in a weird sense, ethics seems to be egotistical when you frame it like I do, because I can argue for my ethics from a moral egoist position. I'm not a moral egoist, and this is why I actually, in hindsight, once I do all my ethics, I look back and appreciate morality because morality is where really the soul of normative and the spirit of normative stuff comes from. It's that attitude we have towards things. But yeah, that's we're putting the cart before the horse here. So there's two types of ethics then that I would like to talk about. And ethics is what we'll really be discussing then, if that's all right with you.
Well, yeah, you're free to go for it. I don't know how much more I can elaborate on my views, though. I do think it's possible to change people's axioms because I think people's axioms are a product of a kind of emotional whim on their part, right? I think that most
Yeah, but
people will believe. So here's an example. We're naturally sociable, which means that most people will intuitively gravitate towards axioms that make them interested in the well-being of others, right? Like it's natural for people to care about their friends and family's well-being. That's a pretty much a biological driver. But tribalism is also a biological driver. So it's also natural for people to have the axiomatic position that their group should be prioritized, that their group's well-being should be maximized, but other groups can suck it, you know? And there are plenty of examples throughout history of people, subscribing to that. The idea of total humanism, like the idea that everyone's value should be maximized, everyone's ethical positions, or like their well-being should be maximized. That's a fairly recent thing, and I don't think many people really believe it. I think they just think they do, because you'll have like liberal humanists who will talk about like universal well-being, but they're also NIMBYs, or like they'll support highways being built through black neighborhoods, and they're also pretty classist and like stuff like that,
yeah,
So I don't know how many people really truly believe that, but I think it's a good thing to strive towards. And I think people who have active other axioms, like people who believe in the value of hierarchy, like fascists, I think it's possible to bring them over because you can try to appeal to their moral intuition. You can try to point out the world is better, like broadly, without their system, and try to sort of pull them in that direction. But I think you're basically just making emotional arguments at that point. I don't think you can logically convince a person out of a given set of axioms towards another. You kind of just have to like rely on their biases and just kind of like, I guess, like trick them into it. But that's all you can do, right? It's kind of like trying to convince a person to empathize with a character in a film. Like you can make logical arguments, but at the end of the day, like you're making an emotional appeal. Like you're trying to make a driver for like an emotional consideration.
Okay, so first of all, I want to focus on something else. But first of all, I want to point out that morality is not entirely about emotion, and it's not like the only reason why people don't stab people is because they feel inside their gut or whatever, hey, I probably shouldn't stab that guy. And the reasoning I would give behind that is that there are psychopaths who act ethically. Now again, they don't confuse our definition of ethics with
Out
how
of
they do it.
self-interest.
Exactly, and that's what I'm getting at.
But I don't. That can't be ethics because it's in the self-interest of like a Nazi camp guard to keep killing the Jews, right? If we defer to self-interest, what we're really doing is deferring to a proxy because the goal of civilization is to align self-interest with ethics. The goal is that a person should be naturally oriented towards ethical behavior because it's best for them to adhere to it. You don't want systems to be put in place with perverse incentives where people are incentivized to act in unethical ways. But that only works as long as we're trying to do that, right? Like, for instance, I would argue that capitalism is a natural, like currently existing example of a perverse incentive where the good charitable behavior, like the ethical behavior, the humane behavior, is not as profitable oftentimes as what self-interest driven behavior might lead to. You know what I mean? So I agree self-interest can guide people towards acting ethically even if they don't care about others or have like no axiomatic roots, or even if they're axiomatically like way the fuck off. But that's because we've structured society to kind of guide people in that way, which I think is a good way. Or I think that's a good thing, right? Like this is one of the reasons why I'm not like an anarcho-primitivist, right? Because I don't think that because I really do think that a lot of our axioms are just down to moral luck, particularly tribalism. So if you didn't have social structures kind of corralling people towards good behavior, I think people would default back to bad behavior, or at least self-interested behavior.
Okay. I think. Uh, yeah, you know what? Screw it. I'm just gonna give my understanding of these things. Present my understanding of all this. Okay, so put it this way. As we said before with ethics, there is there can be said to be an individual ethic and a societal ethic, in the sense that there is individually your ethics. If we keep up with my definition of ethics, individual ethics is when you strive for what you yourself. Let's use the language when you strive for your maximally meaningful life, your as in just what would make you maximally meaningful, maximally happy, and living a meaningful life. Sorry, it's late. So that's the individual ethic. The societal ethic is that the individual ethic considered and made compatible with other people. So the societal ethic is when you consider your individual ethic, which is what you're really trying to get at, and then you factor in other people's interests, factor in other people's individual ethics. Do you understand how I'm using ethics here and what I mean when I say individual ethics then?
Well, I know what you mean. I just think that you could only accept that definition as if you've already made some assumptions. You know what I mean? I don't think there's anything wrong with that definition, only that this is kind of like predicated on a broader, more fundamental set of beliefs, a sort of like basic humanism. because I think this conversation could only really take place after you've taken that for granted. And before that point, the idea of trying to like met all this out, I don't think it would really parse well. You know, there were a couple of first principles we had to establish first.
Such as?
Well, I think like essentially like the idea that there's any value outside of self-interest. People may have an intuitive drive towards being kind to their friends or neighbors or whatever, and their parents, and so on and so forth. And we have an intuitive drive towards self-interest, but those only go so far. If you build out a society large enough, like it's pretty obvious where there are schisms between self-interest and humane behavior. Otherwise, we would all be living like monk-like existences, where we basically use like all of our excess wealth towards helping the poor or whatever. Like we clearly don't do that. Our self-interest isn't a perfect parallel for moral behavior. It just kind of approximates it, like to an extent. And if we're tribes fighting with each other, then like self-interest might involve like just slaughtering different groups of people so they don't bother you and your tribe in the future, or cutting their throats in the middle of the night, you know? A lot of stuff sort of tears apart at the edges there, you know? And I don't really know how, because like in a practical sense, our understanding of ethics only matters insofar as we're capable of using it to change our lives and the lives of others. There's not really a point in studying something unless it influences our behavior in some way. Otherwise, it seems sort of like masturbatory, I guess.
I
Uh,
agree 100%.
yeah, and we can only argue these points insofar as we can convince other people. But what would these words mean to a Nazi, right? If you were talking with a
Great.
Nazi, trying to make these arguments with a Nazi, you know, I don't think there's any system by which you could logically argue them out of their positions. You would kind of just have to like emotively pull them towards like empathetic axioms. And if you can't do that, which is often the case, you hit them with a rock, you know?
I think you can. So first of all, I want to go over how morality actually, morality in the way I use it, supports ethics, and ethics supports morality. Why did we evolve morality in the first place? Like, why did we evolve moral intuitions in the first place?
For self-interest. It
Exactly.
improves our
Being
survival if we have a good
moral,
relationship.
helping other people, caring about other people, having trust, in the same way we have trust in like a fiat currency, having trust in ethics and having trust in other people and having trust in broad frameworks that tell you to care about other people. That has been so helpful for not just humans, but all social animals. Having these moral intuitions is good for us. And from that perspective, we can say, well, maybe our moral intuitions aren't perfect because our moral intuitions can lead us to accepting things like slavery in one century and, the Nazis in another. So I'm not really concerned. I'm not looking at, I'm not digging through our moral intuitions for normative truth in the sense that, again, I like what you said. The only reason we're doing this is to make our lives better, right? We're both consequentialists here. So when we are trying to make our lives better, what are you going to look at for guidance in how you should act and how others should act, and when you want to make frameworks in society for how everyone should act? Are you going to look at moral intuitions? Are you going to look at these subjective axioms people have regarding what is good and bad, and that are purely subjective and not built on like what is actually good for them or what is actually in their best interest? It seems like you shouldn't. It's idiotic to do this because these moral axioms, I mean, sense morality in this sense as I'm describing it is entirely intuitive. These moral feelings we have in our guts are entirely intuitive. I mean, we could have a moral intuition, just hypothetically, that cups are bad. They're smelly and they're stupid, and they are also inferior to our genes. So I'm not interested in these moral intuitions because they can lead to absurd things that don't actually help me and my best life. I don't even trust my moral intuitions sometimes, and instead I look towards ethics. And
That's a choice that you make, though. Like,
but
okay, so what?
but it's a rational choice.
It does, well, rationality isn't really like
Remember, it's a hypothetical imperative. Given that I care about myself, given that I value what I value, which almost seems redundant when you put it like
people
that,
people
I
live
am
and die
going
over
to.
stuff like honor, though. I don't think
I
humans are
know.
dictated by rational self-interest in that way.
I know they're not rational, but they should be
Well,
in
yeah,
their best interest.
but no, something that's rational is not the same as something that's ethical if we're talking about self-interest, because that did bring about slavery. If rational self-interest is the only like marker we're going for, then you can justify a fuck ton of ethnic cleansings as way of settling like ethnic disputes or tribes killing each other or whatever. If we're referring only to that, the only way you could argue out of that through rational self-interest is by convincing people that it's never in their rational self-interest to be unethical, which would be a lie because it obviously is. That's why like super wealthy people are super wealthy, right? Like they did a lot of bad stuff to get where they are. You know, you'd be lying to them if you were like, well, if you were ethical, it would have been better for you. That's not true. Um, and what if a person has a conviction that goes outside of rational self-interest? Like people live and die over honor, right? Like what if that's just more important to them than their personal well-being? Plenty of people have died over honor disputes. Clearly, we have kind of like an intuitive belief that there's something like worth dying, like stuff worth dying for. People, if it was only rational self-interest people cared about, nobody would ever die for anything because once you die, that's the end of your rational self-interest. It's over for you. So you know the fact that people can look beyond that is also part of civilization building. People have like an arbitrary and like let's face it, irrational when it comes to self-interest belief in like the future. What's that term? Like when old men plant trees that they will not live to sit in the shade of, that's when you have civilization. Like that's not rational in a self-interested perspective, right? That's only rational for other people to act in their self-interest for your sake. Like for it's rational if the person planting the trees isn't you. But that's a whole different thing, you know. Then so and I don't think there's any way to navigate this without acknowledging that there's some kind of arbitrarity involved, right?
Yes. Uh, but I'm not really interested in and I make a comparison to act utilitarian versus rule utilitarian here. You understand what I mean by that?
I know the meaning of the terms, yeah.
Because rule utilitarianism is utilitarianism. It's just utilitarianism applied to itself and considering like reality.
Yeah,
Because
it's
if we
recursive
didn't
utilitarianism. Yeah.
exactly. And what I build with ethics, what when we try to build a society in which we are going to be happy, right? That's what we want. Like definitionally, that is what we want. Um, Most fundamentally, we can have other intuitive desires,
What
but
if it's not though? What if like preserving the honor of your family is the thing that you care about?
I'm going to argue that is against your best interest.
But what if they don't care? Like if you told like a samurai that, I don't think they would care. They would be like, okay, it's my family's honor. Why is my self-interest relevant to that?
Because I because the whole I guess I made this. I guess I made myself definitionally correct because ethics is about and the whole reason you engage with ethics is to make your life better. If you're not interested in making your life better, then fine. Like you can disagree. Disagreeing was always an option. I'm not looking for the way I phrase this is that when you cross the Izot gap, right? When you what you want to try and maximize are justifications. So whichever ethical framework you do choose, whichever ideology you do choose, let's say they were laid out on a table. In your best interest, you should choose the one with the most justifications. And it seems to me, right, as if there is no better justification than it is going to help yourself. Because if the person says, I don't care about what is best for myself, I don't care about what is best for myself and other humans, then it seems that if they don't value that if they put that justification over, for example, this is why I tried to make a difference between ethics and morality, because I guess we're gonna have to talk about value theory. Okay.
Well, hold on. Value theory is gay. First of all, important, but also like But you understand what I mean, right? Like this is why I said there was like a precursor, right? There was like something that had to be addressed beforehand before you could use ethics the way we're using them here. Because if a person said like, yeah, I don't care about well-being, I care about my family's honor, that I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I should say I think there's something wrong with that. I don't think there's anything objectively incorrect about that moral stance, you know? Even if they were out there like slaughtering other families and killing children to like defend their family's honor or something, I don't think that their position is objectively wrong. I think it's intersubjectively wrong, and you'd have to deploy the rock. But I don't think you could logic a person out of that or anything.
From the perspective that, okay. Let's put it this way. We're going to go best possible world here. So, from the perspective of the individual, let's ask what is a world in which everyone would be maximally happy? Now,
I
again,
don't think
I
they
know
care.
I can use your honor, you can use your honor example, but these people aren't even interested in ethics in the first place. And they aren't interested in themselves, and they aren't interested in other people. And I would put these people, I rank a bunch of life. Okay, when I said value theory, I know there's value theory in ethics, but value theory is my understanding of how people game theorize, as in like how they get what they want out of ethics and how they get what they want out of society.
Well, I
Get
don't.
get
A samurai wouldn't have need of ethics, right? They would just have their honor code, and that would be the thing they try to maximize.
Yes, and I would argue that that is against their best interest.
Well, but they don't care.
I know, but they should care because it is in their interest to care.
It does, yeah, but it's always a presumption on your part. Like you,
The
they
presumption
it's
the
wrong
presumption
because
is that
they
they
don't
should care about
subscribe.
what they should care about. They
No, they care
the
about their honor. They
right,
care
okay.
about something, just not about their self-interest.
The presumption is that they should care about what would make them maximally happy,
So
right?
what you're describing right now is not the norm throughout human history. The idea of like
I know.
humanism is not, so we don't even have an intuitive bias towards this. This is like a very modern thing. The idea that this is like objective or like the
No, it's not objective. It's again,
Well,
I'm
wait.
just putting it this way.
If your argument isn't that it's objective, but rather that they should believe this, then I agree with that, but that's because of my subjective beliefs.
Okay, so maybe I can explain it a different way. Moral realism in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is defined as an ethical framework you should follow or you would follow if you were rational. Now, again, you don't have to care about rationality. You pointed that out. But when someone doesn't care about what is best for them, like those,
Like
I'm
the
not,
soldiers
I'm
who
not
stormed Normandy.
interested. I'm not interested in appealing to those people. And I'm not saying it's The Rock because these people don't necessarily disagree because they would be happier in a world in which like they valued what makes them happy.
But I don't think, what about like the soldiers who went on Normandy? Like this, like that wasn't in their self-interest. They fucking died.
It was actually. And I would use the example of real utilitarianism. It is in ethics, and I would use the example of fiat currency. We have trust in these things. We need to have trust in these things to build a better world. Yes, sometimes it takes sacrifice. Sometimes it takes the sacrifice of your life. But if we don't have trust in these things as a society, horrible shit happens, like the Nazis.
But that's not
And
really self-interest though, right? Like that's not self-interest. That's more like like I think we're kind of making a presumption again, because now by self-interest, what we actually mean is like adherence to behavior which is socially beneficial for all. But that's not self-interest by definition. If we're accounting how other people treat us and how the world is broadly because of other people's behavior, we're not talking about self-interest anymore, especially if we're the one making the sacrifice. Now we're just substituting self-interest for our ethical systems in general, especially because you can be self-interested while also not believing in the maximization of personal happiness. Like you could believe that it's in your interest to maximize your honor and then do that, right? There are lots of people who prioritize stuff other than their happiness. Inventors would be a good example, or artists who often prioritize not their happiness because they tend to be miserable wrecks who die impoverished, but rather their like creative passions. But that doesn't necessarily make them happy, you know? Like there are a lot of people for whom like the abstract thought of dying after producing something worthwhile, like that's what drives them, but it doesn't, like they're miserable and they would be happier if they just gave it up and then got like a wife to fuck or something, you know? I just I don't know. I think it's presumptuous to say something like it's wrong to not act in the maximization of your own happiness, not just because I don't think most people act that way, but I don't think we necessarily should. Um, because sacrifice and martyrdom seem to be pretty consistent themes in human progress. Um, I don't know. Yeah, I
Okay,
don't know. It gets
so
complicated.
I used happiness, but I really shouldn't have. And I'm not even necessarily utilitarian, so I don't really even care about maximizing happiness. Um, that's why I tried to use the word fulfillment instead, uh, in the sense that a person can be quote unquote happier in life, but if they could have contributed to the human, project, human history, and to the human condition, but they didn't, I would argue that they are less fulfilled. Now maybe that's absolutely like ridiculous because Tesla probably would have been a lot more fulfilled with a family and like a good community and a stable job than um well what he ended up with, which was he loved like a bird.
I like playing with
But
birds. I've got a pigeon on my lap right now.
watch moment. Nothing. Um uh so but I would go back to the idea that I would go back to the idea of trust. And yes, it's a bit naive. And yes, it's a bit um, maybe even ridiculous to say that people should care about other people, that it's in their best interest to. Because people don't care what is technically, from a hyper theoretical perspective, what is in their best interest. But again, I came into this conversation trying to argue that you can appeal to people, that you can appeal to Nazis, for example, and say you would be living a better life. Like from your own perspective, you would be living a better life if you cared about other people, if you didn't want to kill the Jews so bad, if you and that's all I'm interested in, because yes, as moral anti-realists, or at least as not moral objectivists, there is a void there, it seems, a void in which yeah, you can make absolutely any decision and you can justify it, but I'm not interested in what you can justify and what you totally can't justify. I'm interested in just finding better and better justifications for myself and those I care about, and making these appeals to other people who I also know care about things and care about their own happiness and care about their well-being. I'm just interested in building a society in which people are maximally fulfilled and happy from their own perspective.
I don't disagree with that,
And
but that doesn't just it doesn't really contradict what I've said, right? The only position that I've
but
taken is that all of these rely on preconditions. That from a fundamental level, you have to believe in some things in order for this to be like the road you'd go down. You know, for me, it's again, it's like trying to convince a person like which character on a show is most relatable. You know, like if you were watching all of Breaking Bad and it was like, who's more relatable? Is it like Walter White, Jesse, or is it the character or is it the bicyclist you see go by the camera at season 2 episode 7 for 6 seconds and then never shows up again, you know? And I could make a lot of great arguments for how it's either Jesse or Walt, but I could never really make an objective one, you know? Like as obvious as it may seem that there is an objective answer, that it's either Jesse or Walt, there isn't one. There can't be an objective answer because the question who's more relatable it's not one that can be objective. It cannot be objectively determined. So you know, if a person decides it's a bicyclist for whatever reason, you know, I might disagree with them. I can't really say they're objectively wrong. Um, I would have to bring out The Rock. But I also think that there are a lot of good arguments you could make that most people would appeal to for Jesse and Walt, and that if I could make those arguments, I could bring people over. I just don't know if they'd be objective arguments. It would just kind of be playing to their existing biases.
Okay. Yeah, I understand what you're getting at, and because the conversation we had over text was very brief. Maybe I didn't understand what you meant by we either convince the Nazi or we bash him with a rock, because it felt more like you're saying, like, if we can't get him to agree with the axiom we should care about black people, then we're gonna have to bash his skull in. And I would argue that you can totally, and this is what I'm interested in. Would you agree that if you get the Nazi to care about their own subjective self-interest and get them to care about following the ethical framework that would be best for them, that you could argue to them that they shouldn't kill black people and Jews?
I think you could so I think you could logically argue a Nazi into being quiet about their ideas. Through self-interest, I think you could tell a Nazi basically what like the American government told all the Nazis we brought over through Operation Paperclip. We can be like, okay, I can't de-Nazi you, but if you want to keep your job here, you should shut the fuck up. Like shut the fuck up. Shut the fuck up. If you make a fuss, you're going to get in trouble, okay? I think you can convince them that way, and that's kind of what we've done. But as we've realized since the 1960s, that doesn't get rid of racism. That's what we did with racism, right? We didn't really ideologically eliminate racism in this country. Instead, what we did was we basically made it publicly intolerable. We made it illegal to express in the workplace and in hiring decisions and stuff like that. And we made it like, okay, so before you could say the N-word openly, and now you can't in most places in America. And that further and further that goes. We didn't really get rid of the racism though. We just kind of convinced them that it's better to be quiet about it. And now like we have a fascist, Donald Trump, popular with the same people who would have just been openly saying the N-word before, in large part because he represents a kind of open expression of a lot of the intolerance that they've been quietly going about for a while. So I think you can logically convince people to be Nazis or be racists in quieter ways, but eventually the point is going to come where they're going to think like, oh, this is our chance. Because that's what you're really telling them, right? You're telling the Nazi, stay quiet, now's not the time, tomorrow might be. And that's really nothing but a holding mechanism to really move them away from being like a Nazi or a racist or whatever. The best thing you can do is subject them to the kind of subjective interference that moves people over. So one of the best ways to make people less racist is to put them in a neighborhood where they encounter people of different races. Um, if you're ideologically a Nazi, like you believe that the Aryan race is like God-given, like destined to rule the world, blah, blah, then technically spending time with a black person or being around them shouldn't make you less racist. Logically, that shouldn't affect your racism because your racism shouldn't be tied to the actual behavior of non-white people. You might believe that all races are equal, but still believe the Aryan race is like epistemically superior, like beyond empirical analysis. A lot of religious people believe stuff like that. That's common to the belief of Jewish people, right? Like the Israeli fascists, right? Like a lot of them, like literally the chosen people. Like it's not like Jewish people are out here arguing like, well, I believe we're the chosen people because this demographic. Like it's like a God-given thing. So logically, being around a black person shouldn't make a Nazi less of a Nazi, but it does. And I think that's because no matter how like well defined a person's convictions, the fact that they're all arbitrary kind of works in our favor sometimes. Our moral presuppositions may be arbitrary, but theirs are too, which means that they can be moved by emotional bias. And that's the idea, right? Like it's not like when I say like deploy the rock, I'm being kind of sort of like deliberately comedically simplistic. But what I mean to say really is that like there are some unresolvable differences through logic, and that sometimes you just have to rely on like the weight of social pressure and circumstance to pull people towards better positions. You know?
But I didn't just use logic there. I also assumed that the person cares about their own best interest.
But there are martyrs all the time, and a lot of them are good people, right? Socialist revolutionaries have been martyrs in countries all over the world. And they
Again, I think you can care about your own self-interest, and from that perspective, you subscribe to an ethical, or you adopt an ethical framework that does, I mean, in theory, if it were applied, maximize your best interest. And in line with this ethical framework, you come to the realization, and you're correct, that martyrdom is necessary. It doesn't mean,
That's what the
right, that
Nazis believe.
it doesn't mean that in an act utilitarian, but it's what you believe as well. It doesn't mean that in an act utilitarian sense, like uh, martyrdom will be most pleasurable for you. Like, no, I agree with you. That's absurd. But
You're agreeing with self-sacrifice for the betterment of some larger cause. The cause you're biased in selection for here, though, is the well-being of everyone. That is not the cause the Nazis
no,
believe
no,
in.
no, no, no. I'm not saying you have to be interested in the well-being of everyone. I'm just interested in you being interested in the well-being of yourself, because I can argue to the moral egoist that they should care about everyone. I mean, Stirner already did that, Max Stirner. So, I mean, I don't really have to go so far. And again, morality proves that if you're interested in the well-being of yourself, you should be interested in other people's well-being.
I don't know. I
Like,
don't think it can prove anything.
well, okay, it doesn't prove it, but I feel like
But that's my argument.
I feel like, oh gosh, um, but looking at the way morality functions, um, or looking at the way morality exists, it seems as if like morality, the way it was refined by natural selection, by what makes humans, by
But
what
that's
propagates the genes the most.
but that doesn't make it morally right. You know, humans
No,
don't.
no, no, no. Of course not. Of course not. Of course not. I'm not trying to say this is the way it is, therefore it's right. I'm just drawing on it for support for the claim that ethics is in your best interest.
Yeah, but you're defining ethics with bias here. You're defining ethics as being something which pertains to a self-interested respect for
Well,
broader social development.
I kind of defined that at the beginning of the convo. Yes, I did. I
Right, but
said that
that's the
ethics is about
arbitrarity
maximizing.
I'm referring to. And
Yes.
keep in mind, we're self-selecting for humans here. All the stuff that Nazis do with their like arbitrary moral designation for who they care about, we do with humans too. There are plenty of perfectly consistent ethical positions which include animals as part of the groups which we should give this ethical leeway to. But we arbitrarily draw the line at humans because we're androcentric. Naturally, of course, that is a product of our evolutionary bias. We are literally humans. Um, but like, if you believe that you can draw lines on that, and people do, because people do draw those lines. Even vegans have their lines. You know, they'll step on ant colonies. You know, we destroy microbiotic systems when we wipe our face with paper towels. You know, there's always a line somewhere. Nazis
Oh,
usually
I
don't believe
agree. I
their
agree.
victims are humans. And you know, at the end of the day, like choices have to be made here. That's the only argument that I'm making. There are choices
Well,
have to be made, and none of them are objective choices. I think some of them are better, but only because
uh,
I'm standing from the position where I think they're better.
I'm not interested in. I'm not interested. When you say objective, do you mean like objective within the context of in the context of like how human society?
No, nothing is universally objective, like written in the stars or whatever. But even
Yeah.
within the intersubjective framework, I don't think, because when we talk about like ethics being objective, I don't really think we should defer to what like the human society trends us towards, or like what we like the lessons we can learn from our biological instincts or whatever, because I think that leads us in bad directions. I think the problem you're running into is that you're referring to natural predilections towards self-interested behavior as kind of an ethical guideline, but then when that same ethical guideline draws us towards behavior we do consider unethical, you're saying, okay, well, it's not like a full guideline. But you can't like it's either determinative or it's not, right? Like self-interest can make a person care for their family, and self-interest can make a person be a slaver. You know, it's I don't think it's that good of a predictor like on its own. It's we
No,
have
no,
to
no, no.
structure things.
I think self-interest has to be considered almost like from an armchair perspective, and that's the only way it's going to help you like make your life better and make society at large better, and importantly for the vast majority of humans, make 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 their make the lives of those they care about better. Now, I'm actually on the topic of veganism that you brought up. Yeah, totally. I agree. I'm actually vegetarian. Many humanists are these days, especially secular humanists. Um, I know you have to draw the line at somewhere, and I do, but I would argue that it's not in the Nazis' best interest to draw the line where they do. And not only that, I mean, they're objectively wrong when they draw the line there because, I mean, black people aren't like fundamentally different in a way that like their neighbors
I don't
or
think you can
like
say
animals are.
I don't think you can say they're wrong in an objective sense. It's a moral delineation. You can make
No, no, no,
arguments
no,
on
no.
biology.
I think I can say they're wrong in an objective sense in the sense that like they have values, they're capable of acting morally, like black people, I mean, in a way that like animals can't,
I don't think
and
that has
or
anything to
some animals
do.
can't.
I don't think that
But
makes
it
any.
does because it seems like the Nazis' justifications for not caring about black people is the fact that they're subhuman. But if we can prove that they're just as human, you know, the
You
marginal
can't.
cases argument
But you
that
can't.
vegans use,
You
if
can't
you can
prove.
prove that they're just as
You
human,
can't though. You can't prove. Not in the way the Nazis meant human.
well, how do they mean human? I mean, if
There's
it's
an
kind of like a definitionally correct.
What are we, linguistic prescriptivists? They thought there was
I mean,
something morally different about the Aryan race. They also thought there were things that were biologically different about the Aryan race, but most of their propaganda, it wasn't just our genes are better. A lot of it was like God's chosen, again, like the Zionist line. You could, like, if you talk to an ideologically determined Nazi, they will still argue the innate inferiority of a black person, even if they understand and accept that every single empirical measurement between them and that black person is the same. And I don't think you can say they're objectively wrong in that because they're using terms and definitions that don't even refer to objectivity. There's nothing empirical to touch on. We're talking about like a purely moral designation, which is why you keep a rock on hand.
I think okay, I think you actually touched on something that I totally agree with. Oh gosh, I
Like
was reading
you
chat.
can
Why
see
did I do
this
that?
you can see this a lot with bigotry, right? Like especially consider modern scientific racism is only a couple hundred years old. Before then, we were still highly tribal. Plenty of different kingdoms, peoples, nations, religions, ethnic groups hated each other. And what was the predominant explanation for their hatred? It was not, oh, these people are biologically worse than us. It was a kind of vague gesturing towards epistemic inferiority, like God has determined that we are the greater people, or there's something just morally better about us. And a lot of it was just pure undistilled, or sorry, like distilled tribalism. Like we're better than them because we're us and they're them. Like we're the good ones and they're the bad ones, and that's
Right,
it. And none of that could
but
be disproven through empirical measurements. You couldn't go up to them with like a brain scan of one of the other groups and go like, ah, no, you're wrong. You're actually the same. It doesn't matter to them. So, and all of these are moral judgments. You have to attack the
I know, I
axioms.
know, I know, and oof, I don't think so. I don't think you have to attack the axioms themselves because you see, this is my experience talking with like pretty radical people on the right. It seems like the whole fact that they appeal to like brain sizes and and these IQ charts of like the intelligence of black people and their murder rates. The fact that they do all that seems to prove to me that they really do base their valuation of white people as opposed to black people on epistemic grounds, on the fact that they are fundamentally different. No, I'm not saying that Nazis can't still exist. I'm saying they can still totally exist from my if you understand morality in the way I do and do want to maximize well-being, because you can just decide not to want to maximize well-being, right? It was always a choice. I'm a moral anti-realist with you. It was always a choice just to not value what will be best for you from your own perspective.
Or others.
But right, exactly, or others. But it's just kind of like a ridiculous choice because if you don't go off of that logic, then you can justify anything. You can justify a framework that says you
Yeah.
should kill all cups. I don't know what it's on with cups today, but the point is, I'm only interested with
So wait,
justification.
no,
What
again,
what what ethical framework has the most justifications?
you're
And it seems like
overstating,
from
you're really overstating how intuitive caring for other people is. Human history has mostly been tribalism. Human history has
I
mostly been
know,
people slaughtering
I
each other.
know,
So
I know.
you're suggesting like we have such a strong intuition towards self-interest, and by self-interest you actually mean broader social betterment, that we would defer to it like, and anything outside of that is insanity. But that's not true. the idea of self-interest as you're defining it is not only relatively new, it's also not that common in the world today. The idea that I'm talking about, which people form arbitrary social and tribal biases for who they care about, is by far the contemporarily and historically supported intuitive ethical position. Go to any tribesman or any person who lives in like a village in Afghanistan, or go to like any of the Balkan countries, like you're not going to be able to do like argue them out of their petty tribal hatred of their neighbors with like talk of self-interest, because their self-interest only includes their people, their country. An idea for like broader humanism, like the idea that the Romans would have cared about the lives of the barbarians they squashed outside of making sure they had enough people to grow their wheat. Like this is a very specific like thing that people choose to, well, maybe not choose to believe in, but like there are a set of biases that we have to adopt, maybe at least unknowingly. Um, I don't think they're any more right than any other system. I just think that
So
they
so
serve my axiomatic values better.
yeah, but how do you go about justifying your axiomatic values?
I don't.
But if you don't need justifications for things, you can believe in anything. It's one of the most important reasons why we need justifications for
No,
things.
no. Well, you can. I mean, you can believe that if you want, but if you're a moral anti-realist, then you have to agree you don't need a justification for your axioms. That's why they're called properly basic
You
beliefs.
don't need one. It's not like, reality, like a galaxy is going to come along and bonk you on the head if you don't have justifications. But if you don't have justifications, you can believe in anything.
Uh-huh.
If you don't adhere to your own logic, then like this is the whole argument about logic in the first place. One of the arguments about why you should care about logic, because if you don't care about logic, then you can justify and believe in anything.
Yeah, it's yep, you can, and people do.
I know. And
Well, there you
the
go.
only thing I want,
Sucks, doesn't it?
I know it sucks, but the only thing I wanted to communicate in this debate was that if we can get people to care about about a life that would be maximally fulfilling to them, right? And I feel like that's a very selfish thing we can convince people to care about. And tangentially, that a life that is maximally meaningful to yourself oftentimes necessitates that other people you care about live maximally meaningful lives. Yeah, the whole shebang. If we can get people to agree with that, to maximally meaningful lives, to value their own maximally meaningful lives, I think we can get people to agree with basic, more or less, the ethics that you and I share, caring about all humans. Because again, by convincing them to buy into these moral, ethical frameworks that are just principally, they care about all
I agree,
humans.
but what you're basically
Because
saying is if we could just
right.
get them to believe in our axioms, they would believe in our axioms. I agree. Yeah, if you can get people to
And I'm
believe that
arguing it's
there's
in your best interest. I'm arguing, like, definitionally it is in their best interest to subscribe to the axioms,
it depends on
because
what we define as best interest.
best interest is in, like, what would make them maximally happy, maximally fulfilled.
But as
And
we've
I know that's
established,
not that's not necessarily the best interest. But all I came into this discussion wanting to prove is that it is, like, when you define best interest by what seems like obvious, which is gosh.
what's obvious for best
Oh.
interest
Yeah,
is a
circular,
person's
circular. I
No, it
know.
is circular. What's
I
obvious
know.
for
I know.
people's best interest is tribal. The obvious intuitive answer for who should I care about has always been the family, the people nearby me. You're arguing for an unintuitive, you should care about
No.
everyone. No, 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 you are.
No.
Because no, 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 you are. Because your definition of self-interest refers to a kind of like broader social betterment. You're talking about like the acting in ways which maximize happiness and fulfillment in line with broader social interest. You couldn't without recognizing the potential social benefit of martyrdom, even while referring to personal happiness. But the problem is, again, it's circular. People would better believe in our axioms if they believed in our axioms. Well, certainly that's true. I do think that people have a kind of intuitive
Uh,
deference towards a lot of these ideas. But if we want to talk towards intuition, like most of political debate, especially with the right, comes down to like arguing against their intuitive adherence to tribal biases, like how it comes to race or immigration or whatever. So oftentimes I feel like people intuitively gravitate towards non-humanistic principles, and we actually have to argue them towards it. But when you argue with them more and more, you realize a lot of their beliefs are not about the maximization of human happiness, like at all. Instead, they believe in a kind of innate hierarchy, that they believe it is morally right to justify and defend, that it's morally wrong for people to get things that they don't deserve. Not just when bad things happen to good people, but when good things happen to bad people. But that belief that there's a hierarchy that needs to be maintained has nothing to do with human well-being or happiness. It refers to a kind of intuitive, sort of childlike deference to justice, um, in like a very primitive way. But moving a person away from that, it's not just a logical argument, right? Like you have to really like break them down to their fundamentals to move them over. But you can never find an objective argument against hierarchy, right? Like you can find intersubjective ones, but if there's an objective argument against hierarchy, I've never heard it. Just people believe in what they believe in, I guess. You could argue that it would make them happier if they believed your set of beliefs, but maybe happiness isn't what they're going for. Like you could tell like a socialist in Germany, like, hey, it would make you happier if you shut the fuck up about workers' rights and just like let the whole Nazi thing happen. But they probably wouldn't move over on that either, because people have convictions. And those convictions are often stronger than self-interest. And what people define as a community or a community worth defending can often sort of translate across personhood and time. People will martyr themselves for causes that don't even exist yet, right? Like there are people who will die trying to defend ideas that they have like no way of bringing into existence through their own death. Yeah. And people can believe whatever they want, you know? And that's why you have to have the rocks. You can move people over emotively, but beyond that, this is a rock-based sort of moral framework.
And all I would argue is that it seems. Well, that I shot myself in the foot right there.
No, you didn't. Don't be silly.
No. I meant as in like it seems, because I already start on a subjective footing because it seems to me. All I'm trying to get across. That's the only thing I'm trying to get across is that it is in your best interest to care about yourself. And if it's in your best interest to care about yourself,
depends on their interest, right?
Then, of course, you don't need to care about yourself. Of course, there is an existential void here.
Yeah, that's all I'm saying. But
I know.
It's kind of like I don't think it's objectively correct for a person to want to be happy, but like if a person was like prying their own fingernails off with a vice, and you were like, actually, you don't have to do that. And the guy was like, what do you mean? And you were like, if you stop prying your fingernails off with a vice, your fingers will hurt less. And they're like, what? I think you could move them over based on some intuitive biases, but of course, what makes his fingers feel better, it's not really an objective moral thing. Like, it's not objectively right for him to stop tearing his fingers apart, you know? He probably would be better off if he didn't, but, that's just
He didn't have to care about himself. Yes.
That's my subjective bias, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so,
I do have to head soon because I'm already 15 over stream. I didn't mean to ramble for so long. I apologize.
Can I read? I know this is really, really weird, but I write things down, and I'm typically better in text, so I'm just gonna read if that's all right. I
read stuff out loud?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can just stop me whenever you want. Okay, so basically, as a moral anti-realist who values the broad subjective values of humanity, values of humanity, when I say that, I mean as in like the broad subjective values that humans value. How do I convince others to do the same? I can claim acting ethically consistently across the board would make for a net positive world for them included. But what if they simply appeal to subjective choice? What if they say they don't care about what makes for them a better world? If I appeal to metaphorical truth of the Jordan Peterson, as in if we agreed our purpose was to maximize each individual living their most meaningful lives for the sake of this purpose, obviously reaping massive rewards if pursued, you could just, again, appeal to your own subjective rejection of this supposed better world and say, well, yeah, but I only care about, let's say, biological humans or the Aryans, and I don't have a justification other than that I do. Well, the truth is that humanism is ultimately a choice. To embrace the values that make for you meaningful existence, to seize the responsibility of custodians of life, yada yada yada, or not do this. Even if a humanist world would objectively be a world in which you are most maximally fulfilled compared to all others, literally what it promises to do to each for each human as they define themselves by being. Even if we could know that this world would bring about this future 100%, it's still a choice for you to embrace this and say, yes, I want what's best for myself. Yes, I want what's best for myself, for my family. I want a life in which we are living maximally meaningful lives, just grilling all day. Morality is not objective. We cannot derive oughts from facts and observations, and thus, no matter how much it may be a fact that humanism would grant the most people eudaimonia, the choice to embrace a future we would all enjoy is still a choice. There may be bias, but it's still a choice. There is always destiny and duty and purpose, and it is always the individual's responsibility to accept that purpose or to decline. Ideology can favor and sabotage the follower's self-interest, but how much it serves its followers and ushers in their utopia is a measure of how beneficial it is, never how objectively just and moral it may or may not be. To embrace the ideology, whatever it is, after everything is said and done, is always only an existential choice. There are many other choices in this thrift shop of ideology. Humanism tries to accomplish nothing legendary, nothing inspired by a deity, nothing revolutionary. Well, it doesn't market itself so anyways. Humanism tries to deliver to humans a compatible life that derives worth from its relevant similarity to humans, meaningful lives. It tries to define itself as the best choice for us. Oh, I didn't even talk about the theory of ideals. That's a really cool...
Wait, were you writing this while we were talking? Now I know why you let me talk for so long and didn't interrupt me.
I wrote some of this, although honestly, this is like a text I've had in my backpack for like not my backpack.
Then you fucking cheated. I didn't bring any
mean?
outside materials to this conversation.
What do you mean I cheated?
You cheated. You brought fucking notes.
Am I not allowed to do that?
Yeah, you fucking cheat. Yeah, you do that for your fucking philosophy class texts, your goddamn essays.
I don't.
You write it down beforehand on a piece of paper, and then you like lick it, and then you stamp it down on the essay paper, so like you peel it off and the text is there. You just wrote it backwards to begin with.
Wait a minute. This seems like how you're supposed to do philosophy from my perspective. Philosophy isn't about like going down, sitting, doing a test, and being correct in the moment. It's about like sitting back, thinking about what is going to be best or whatever issue you're tackling, and in time like coming to the correct conclusion. It's not about like, oh dude, I can like destroy you in a debate, bro. It's about like sitting down and just thinking. Like I care about the person who is going to be right, but only after like years, more than the person who is going to be right who is going to be right is right, but their method is flawed. The reason why they're right isn't because they did and honestly thought through every single opposing and argument for it. They're right because they actually like. I care about the person who's right because they actually like took time and days of their lives just thinking about it, and that's what I tried to do. Okay, and I think you're wrong, and that's why I came on here to present my findings.
You know how Aristotle believed that it was the prerogative of all men to be physically fit so they could see the fruit of their labor?
Yeah.
Okay, I think that all philosophy tests should be you guys running naked on a track, and you have a clipboard and a multiple choice test sheet that you have to fill out. And one of the questions is your lap time, and the rest of them are yes/no questions over what is good or not. And it reads like one of those like car AI like crash moral choices, where it's like, do you run into like the toddler or do you run into like the 3 elderly women or something? And you guys are just yes knowing that, and then you make it to the end, and that determines whether you get to be a philosopher.
Yeah, that's pretty based.
I think.
Hey, you're kind of an expert at that. You should look into.
Yeah, like, I feel like I'd be pretty good at that actually, except I can't run for shit. I don't mean to goober your final bit here or anything. I've got a head.
No, you're totally fine.
I appreciate you coming on, genuinely.
I feel like I could have done a lot more in this debate. I feel like I failed to communicate, which is ultimately a problem with me.
You didn't
But
fail to
that's
communicate. You're obviously nervous, but a lot of people are when they talk to me, and I think chat finds it very endearing. So if anything, I think it won out in your favor, really.
I mean, I've been watching you for like years at this point. So like it was kind of nervous because you're not just some like random dude on the other side of the aisle that I'm gonna destroy in a debate, you know?
That's okay. I get nervous every morning when I look in the mirror. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Okay, see ya. If you ever want to talk about, see, I'm interested in meta ethics. Not that much actually. I'm interested in ethics a lot more. But if you want to talk about some of your stances, actually, I shouldn't.
I would rather kill
This is
myself than discuss meta ethics for even a fraction of a second.
yeah. No, I totally get you. I think meta ethics is really stupid. I just wanted to go out here on a limb and say that yeah, well, we kind of can appeal to people who already agree with us.
So I've got
Anyways,
just not me biting down on the cyanide pill that I keep tucked in the back of my my jaw. Uh, thank you. Have a wonderful day.
yeah, you too. Adios,
Take
amigos.
care. That was fun. That whole debate was meta ethics. Well, the whole debate was kind of like why we shouldn't talk about meta ethics. Okay, so just in case there are people who don't really understand what I was getting at there with the whole moral anti-realism thing. Okay, so to explain like what the point is really quick. Okay, so basically, like I think that some things are good and some things are bad. What I think is good and bad, like, can depend on a lot of really complicated factors. You know, when we talk about whether or not things are good or bad, we're usually talking about something called normative ethics, which is like that's what we talk about when we talk about ethics. You know what I mean? Like, well, is it good to feed the homeless? You know? So you could say, I believe it is good to feed the homeless. And then, you know, somebody might ask why, okay? Why is it good to feed the homeless? And then you could say, well, I don't think that people should starve just because they're poor. And then you could ask like, okay, so why? And then you could say, well, I don't think that humans should suffer unfairly. And then somebody could ask, okay, why? And then you could say, well, I think human well being is good. And then somebody could ask you, okay, why? Now, the problem here is that we've kind of retreated all the way back to the farthest point that normative ethics can take you. There's not really an answer to that. Like, why do you believe human suffering is good? Or sorry, human suffering is good. Why do you think human well-being is good? Why is human suffering bad? You know, um, you've kind of been backed up to the furthest point from a normative ethical position. So when I talk about moral anti-realism, you know, and we talk about axioms or properly basic beliefs or first principles, we now get to a first principle. And at this point, you would go, you know, somebody asks you, why do you think human well-being is good? And your answer can be because that is a axiomatic belief that I have. It's a principle belief that I hold, a properly basic belief, a first principle. Like, and what we're talking about right there is a non-normative ethical position because it's not justified. That's why I say that axioms are arbitrary. They can't be defended. You can explain why you hold axioms, but at the end of the day, those defenses of your axiom are going to be about the consequences of your normative beliefs. It's downstream. There's nothing higher up than the axiomatic value, unless you wanted to get into meta ethics, which I fucking don't. So the idea is that once you've asked enough whys, you get backed up all the way to the axiom. And, you know, I don't think anyone really has like a concrete set of specific axioms they hold. It's more like a general vague idea of the things that they value. Because they're first principles, they're kind of necessarily blurry. And I think that's fine. For the most part, humans tend to have aligned ethics when it comes to their axiomatic beliefs. I think that we have strong biological impulses towards stuff like believing human well-being is good, you know? Fundamentally, I think that our brains are wired to like be biased in favor of that. Um Not everyone, you know. In fact, so strong a bias we have that people who can't experience empathy, we literally have medical terms to describe their brains. Like, this person is antisocial. This person is a psychopath. You know, that kind of stuff. Um, that's because the biases we have towards humanistic axioms are so strong that when people don't have them, we kind of consider it like a problem, you know? Which in a way it kind of is, though it's possible to be antisocial and still behave ethically for reasons that guy laid out, sort of aligned self-interest. Um, so The point that I'm getting at here is that axioms, since I believe them to be arbitrary, I don't believe there's any such thing as objective morality. If a person had an axiom where they were just like, yeah, white people are great, fuck Jewish people, yeah, and that was an axiom that they held, like not a normative ethical position, but an axiom, you know? Yeah, humanistic probably wouldn't be the best term there, Demon Mama. Socially aligned, yeah. If a person had those axioms, I don't think that's empirically, morally, objectively wrong in the sense that there's something universally wrong with it. I think that they're intersubjectively wrong, as in they deviate from the axioms that I prioritize and the ones we tend to like sort of socially gel with the most, which I think align more with your sort of humanist values, you know, and equality and egalitarianism and stuff like that. Um, so the basic argument that I'm getting at here is that it's really, 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 really difficult to have a debate with somebody whose axioms are different from yours. This is one of the reasons that I have a bugbear when it comes to religion, you know? Because if a person has a set of fundamental values that are different from yours, because you're no longer in the realm of normative ethics, you can no longer refer to normative positions as a way of debunking their axioms. So if a person has an axiomatic value for human suffering, for example, let's say they're like a opposite human and they have an axiomatic belief that human suffering should be maximized rather than human well-being, right? If you were to talk with them while they're in the middle of, I don't know, stabbing a pregnant woman to death or something, you could be like, dude, cut that out. Can't you see that's bad? And they could look at you and be like, well, actually, I think it's good. And you can be like, but you're hurting that woman. And they can be like, yeah. You can be like, well, causing harm is bad. And they could be like, no. Like, how could you argue with them? You know what I mean? You can't really. You can't there's not a, you can't make a logical argument. That's why you have a rock. Yes, exactly. Yeah, people make like the orc argument, and by people I mean me. The idea is like if you have like 40k orcs in Warhammer 40k are basically just like mold creatures, and the only thing they care about is fighting, and that's it. Suffering, they don't care. Whether they're suffering or the other person, they don't care. They just want to fight. That's it. That's it. Biologically, that's it, you know? Imagine we were a starfaring civilization and we encountered orcs, that kind of orcs. They don't care if they die. They don't care if we die. They don't care about their civilization. They don't care about ours. They just want to fight. That's it. They don't care if they're fighting warriors. They don't care if they're slaughtering children. They don't care. They just want to fight. That is it, you know? How could you tell them, how could you argue that their morals are wrong? The answer is you can't, right? Like you recognize this, correct? You can't. It's literally not possible. You can make normative arguments, but all of them are downstream your axioms. They have different axioms, therefore your normative arguments are not relevant to them. They are like within the purview of their axioms, they're objectively correct. As objectively correct as you are to believe that them slaughtering people for no reason is morally wrong from yours. That's why when I call people orcs in a political sense, what I mean, like Republicans or whatever, I mean like their morals are so out of whack with ours that it's like you can't like you can't even do anything, you know? So that's the point that I'm trying to make. And I don't think that humans or orcs would be the objectively right or wrong ones in that case. I just think that you would just have to have the bigger orc. You know what I mean? Or sorry, the bigger rock. They would have the bigger orc because they're the orcs. Orcs get quite big. You would have to have a bigger rock than they are orc. There you go. You need to have a big, big, big rock. Okay, you guys get me? Do you understand? Like you could never make peace with the orcs. It's not really possible. Like you just have to politically disempower them. Straight up, the politics AMA you did last tonight's AMA and debate's been fantastic to agree to. Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's been fun. I'm trying to get back into the swing of things, you know? As long as I can avoid debates with a, like, fucking Zionist guy. I hate debating people who don't care, you know? That's why I've not been interested in, like, infrared or whatever. And, like, even, like, Nick Fuentes, even though despite all of his bitching, he could just come on if he emailed me. Like, you know, but like it's like you have sincere political beliefs. Well, let me do like the DreamWorks smug face at you while I recite every fucking 4chan green text post I've ever seen on poll. You know, like great, fantastic, you know, wonderful. I love these conversations. But thank you, I really appreciate that. Um, yeah. You could demonstrate they believe in an axiom they're not admitting they hold. Yes, yes, yes. So to finish the point, the point that I'm trying to make is you can't argue a person out of their axiom because their axiom is objectively wrong, because there are no objectively wrong axioms. What you can do instead is try to point out contradictions between their axioms and their actual behavior. See, I think there's a reason why humans naturally gravitate towards the kind of socially aligned axioms that we hold. I think that we biologically benefit from it. Like I said while talking to the philosophy guy, right? I don't think that human suffering or human well-being are each more or less objectively right or wrong, but I do think humans tend to like well-being over suffering. Ooh, yes, wait. Double babies? Wait.
She's been there for a while.
Yes. Ooh. Ooh. He wants to bat. He's purring. Stream, can you see his chest falling with the purr? Beep. First strike.
She looks so disappointed.
Ooh. There we go. No! Yeah, she hates him. Chicken time. Chicken. Artemy. Look at his fat butt wiggle. Ooh. Ooh. Bite me. Bite me. Nope, he loves me. Bite me. Bite me. Bite me. Ooh. Got your foot. Nope, he loves me too much. He's so chill, dude. Here, wait. Look at him. Ooh. Ooh. He wants to bite my chin. Yeah? Ooh. He's gonna bite. Bite. Ooh. Look at him. He's soup. I think you can make an experiential case to challenge axioms as a difficult process, but when I was religious, this is something that happened that led to my deconversion. Many, many conversions in which the value of my axiom was challenged. A key moment was having a close beloved friend come out as gay. Yeah, yeah. No, this is what I mean, Dima. So, like, for example, a person can have the pure axiomatic belief that being gay is morally wrong, like in its purest form, in which case nothing can happen, theoretically, that should be able to challenge that belief. But in reality, usually people who are homophobic don't have that pure axiomatic belief. Instead, they believe broadly in human freedom and well being, and they think that being gay somehow is aberrant or predatory, like there's something wrong. A pure homophobe wouldn't have to make the argument that gay people are predators or dangerous to children or anything, because they could justify their homophobia from a purely axiomatic position. But instead, oftentimes bigotry takes the form of a kind of adjacency. I do think there are pure racists out there. There are people who believe, like on a fundamental level, the betterment of their race over others, and nothing could logically convince them out of that. And I do think those people exist, but I think they're the minority, which is why a lot of racists, understanding this, will make arguments like, oh, 1350, whatever. A pure racist wouldn't need black people to commit more crime to be racist. A pure racist could justify it axiomatically. There are such people, but I do think they're the minority. And often you can win people over by sort of tearing apart the normative positions they hold, which are or the empirical beliefs they have, which sort of prop up an inconsistency in their belief system. And that's often when you move people over, you know? You can also just call them a retard, end the call, and go eat pizza. That's true. What's 1513? 1350. It refers to the a disproportionate amount of violent crime committed by black people in the United States. There's an easy sociological justification for it, but often racists will just throw it out of context as a way of sort of implying that black people are naturally more violent. How would you describe the moral framework of the average modern conservative? Incoherent. But that's the case for like almost everyone. Very, 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 very few people have a consistent, coherent a set of political virtues or values or whatever. Like most people, if you ask like, what are your axiomatic values? Like they're not gonna, like they don't, they'll they'll hit you with a rock for asking. Do you think you do have a consistent ethical system? I'd like to think so. I don't think anyone has a perfectly consistent ethical system because ethics is so incredibly fucking complicated. Like nobody's solved ethics, you know. I don't think anyone has a perfectly coherent or consistent system, but I think you can have like increasingly consistent and coherent ones, you know? It's kind of like how it's not really possible to draw a perfectly straight line, but you can sure as hell tell the difference between a good attempt and a bad attempt, you know? But if you want to go down to like the molecular level, you know, like, oh, well, see 3 atoms off to the left here, you know, or like a circle. Yeah, you know, there's, you know, people can, there are, you, yeah, you know, how does someone develop a strong and consistent ethical system? You think about it a lot, I'm afraid.